Beyblade has always been about pushing the limits. Every year, new parts come out raising the power level more and more. In the beginning, things were pretty balanced between the first two seasons as most Beyblades weighed around the same, which meant in the competitive scene you could practically use any combo that you wanted. But then came the 4D series and suddenly everything got heavier, stronger, and even more advanced. But then also came the 0G series where synchron Beyblades completely outclassed everything that came before. And to keep everything balanced, the competitive scene needed to have formats that separated these Beyblades into a balanced state. But here's the thing, there was one Beyblade from those early seasons that didn't need heavy parts or crazy raw power. This Beyblade defied the odds and competed in all levels of Beyblade, even with all that weight creep. And not only did it just simply compete, at times it dominated those high-level Beyblades. Because this Beyblade had only one way to lose, and that one way tested your opponent's skill. Because if they failed, you would ultimately win. The Beyblade that refused to be left behind by the rise of weight creep. Instead, it cemented its own playstyle, challenging every single blader across every format. This was Medio L-Drago. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how players turned Medio L-Drago into a competitive menace. To give some context, in the Metal Fight generation, most Beyblades were designed to spin to the right. This made battles more consistent, easier to battle, and created flashier, more explosive hits when two right-spinning Beyblades clashed. This was just the standard. But the L-Drago lineage was unique to its own, as it was the first Beyblade in the Metal Fight series to spin exclusively to the left. And instead of the right versus right matchup where the spin direction works against each other, the left versus right matchup pretty much turns into both Beyblades supporting each other. But in Beyblade, we love to call this interaction specifically as spin stealing, but it's also known mainly as spin equalization, which was quite unique to the L-Drago line. Spin equalization is basically when two Beyblades that are spinning in opposite directions start to match each other's spin speed during a battle. But what really matters the most is which Beyblade can survive for a millisecond longer at the end of the battle. Now, this concept also has a name called Life After Death, or in short, LAD. Life After Death is basically the last few seconds of a Beyblade's spin duration, typically towards where it starts to tip over. For example, this metal sharp tip has extremely bad life after death because of how sharp it is. Once the Beyblade tips over, it has nothing to balance on and will quickly die out compared to a tip like wide defense, which allows your Beyblade to spin slightly longer at the end even when it loses its balance. Now, in competitive Beyblade, people figured out that there's a special tip that excels in life after death called wave-wide defense that synergizes perfectly with Medio L-Drago. This is because wave-wide defense practically has 3 total layers onto its tip, which allows Medio L-Drago to balance on 3 separate levels: the tip, the second layer, and the base. With the addition of wave-wide defense, it practically cemented Medio L-Drago as the ultimate life after death combo, as no other Beyblade will be able to match it. But wait, can't other people that are using right spinning Beyblades just also use wave-wide defense on their own and also match the life after death to beat L-Drago? Well, not exactly, because wave-wide defense is seen to be a pretty subpar tip in both defense and stamina. And 90% of other Beyblades are still right spinning, so you'd be gambling on your opponent using L-Drago and overall lowering your chances of winning. But before we hop onto the next segment, let me tell you about Beyhaven and BeyLocker. BeyLocker is the #1 place to get Beyblade X parts, which is the newest generation of Beyblade for either competitive or casual play. But if you're looking for Metal Fight Beyblades and or antique Beyblades, Beyhaven is the place to go. Beyhaven has all types of Metal Fight Beyblades from Season 1 to Season 3, as well as a parts section to build your own Beyblade. Some Beyblades get sold out pretty quick, but don't worry, Beyhaven restocks every Friday at exactly 12 AM EST. Check out these 2 sites for all Beyblade interests. Now, back to the video. But most importantly, people found a really niche detail on Medio L-Drago's energy ring. To give some context, Beyblade had multiple brands associated with distributing its toy. For instance, the original brand Takara Tomy was the main and original distributor from Japan. But for America, Hasbro was in control of distributing Beyblades. What's important about this was that people found out that there was a huge comparable difference between Hasbro Meteor L-Drago and Takara Tomies Meteor L-Drago. The rubber on Takara Tomies Meteor L-Drago was actually quite hard. Like, the texture was rubber, but more of a hard rubber. But the rubber on Hasbro's Meteor L-Drago was way softer and had a lot more friction to it. This made Hasbro's Meteor L-Drago way better than the others, as the high friction rubber allowed L-Drago to spin steel way more efficiently than any other Beyblade. Now, by combining everything together with a metal faceball, you had a Beyblade that was built to succeed in every battle by simply outlasting your opponent using their own energy. You didn't need to have the best stamina, you didn't need to have the best attack power, Meteor L-Drago just needed to survive till the end. Survive and you win. Simple as that. This made Meteor L-Drago an absolute threat in every single format, even in the highest formats where Beyblades have more than doubled the weight of Meteor alone. As long as it survives towards the end, the rate of victory was extremely high. Survive and you win. Simple as that. Because of this, Meteor L-Drago dominated against stamina and defense types. To give some context, in all three formats, the top stamina type Beyblades mainly utilize the 4D tip bearing drive with adjustments to the wheel based off weight. Although bearing drive does have some great LAD of its own, it wasn't as great as wave wide defense. And also because of its 4D nature, the height of the tip makes the Beyblade tall compared to Meteor where it had a lower center of gravity. And not to mention defense types, that was pretty much a free win. Even the King Flame 230 was no match for Meteor L-Drago, as L-Drago could just fully spin steel and topple it over. This basically meant that in stamina and defense battles, weight and spin duration was pretty much completely irrelevant. All that mattered during these matchups was which Beyblade could rotate just by a tiny margin at the end of their spin duration. So how do you exactly beat something like this? Well, if all Meteor needed to do to win was to survive, then the answer was quite simple. Meteor L-Drago just needed to get knocked out in battle, which meant the number one answer to Meteor L-Drago would be attack types. But even then, it wasn't just as simple as knocking Meteor L-Drago out, because it was actually a pretty difficult job to do, especially in earlier formats like Metal Fight Limited. Most attack Beyblades in this format weighed relatively similar to Meteor L-Drago, so there wasn't any real weight advantage or power creep in play. But as you slowly bring L-Drago into the higher weight class formats like 4D and or Standard is when you would slowly see it struggle a bit more. But Meteor L-Drago didn't just simply falter to attack types. There was still one weird but genius strategy that gave it a fighting chance called soft launching. Basically, you would launch at half power on purpose, which sounds kinda wrong, right? Like, why would launching weaker ever be a good thing? But here's the thing, launching at full power maximizes the output of recoil coming from your Beyblade. By soft launching, you cut down that recoil due to the low RPM. But especially at the same time, Meteor L-Drago gets a huge boost in its spin stealing ability. Because Meteor is spinning slower and in the opposite direction, it creates more consistent friction against a faster right spinning opponent. If the opposing Beyblade is spinning at full speed, say 100%, and Meteor is at 50%, the difference in RPM causes rotational energy to flow towards Meteor L-Drago. As their spin rates start to equalize, Meteor gains spin while the opponent loses it. And the result? The opponent's stamina starts draining fast, sometimes even faster than it can land a solid hit. Because of that, attack types only had 2 or 3 hits to knock out Meteor. And if they missed that window, Meteor would drain them dry and take control of the match. This really tested your opponent because Meteor L-Drago is always going to be centered in the arena. It will technically be the easiest target you'll ever be hitting as an attack type. So whether you pass or fail will technically be considered up to your own skill. In comparison, this also resembles how the original owner of Meteor L-Drago would simply hand spin his Beyblade in the anime, absorbing the opponent's stamina with pretty much no ease. And technically, soft launching pretty much works the same way as hand spinning due to the low power being put out. Unfortunately, even with how much aura you gained by doing this, it wasn't a legal method of launching in competition. You needed to use a launcher, you couldn't just hand spin. But yeah, that was Meteor L-Drago, the Beyblade that defied all odds. It utilized its special ability to the max, being able to literally survive in every single competitive aspect. No other Beyblade in this generation really had this sort of influence in every single format like how Meteor L-Drago did. But what do you guys think about Meteor L-Drago? In contrast to its first evolution that was an attack-type menace, Meteor L-Drago really cemented its legacy, but not for an attack-type Beyblade, but as the best spin-stealing Beyblade in existence. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and please consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video.